This program is brought to you by Emory University.
That's lovely. So yesterday, David Garner and I had a nice dinner discussion, and we started to scratch the surface of a very deep subject of how and why one might take folk melodies and use them in a classical context, and where the areas between the two genres get kind of blurry, and we were referencing different composers that have, well, there's a long precedent for that, isn't there? Bartók and Tchaikovsky and Smetana and all sorts of people. So one of the things that I didn't quite have time over dinner to discuss with you is how you went about choosing the tunes, and what about those tunes that you did choose kind of stood out from the thousands that that are out there, tens of thousands, and to be able to choose those 13.
Thanks, Jamie. It's a great question. To be honest, I don't really know. Some of them I was familiar with. I started playing the banjo in 2005 or so. So a number of these tunes I learned just from listening to records and playing and searching through tune books from various regions. But I think I subconsciously at least went through and tried to pick tunes with very different characters. So I think the Day Dawn has a very specific character that's I think quite unique. The sort of melodic shape and harmonic contour and everything of that tune is for example, very different from the Tenpenny Bit or something like that. So I think I was thinking about how to create a collection of tunes that had a really broad reach. So I didn't want to stay in one area each time.
Did you have kind of a template in your mind of how the piece would be structured, and then you were kind of like looking through the sort of playing field to find the right fit of tune that would fit into that template? Or was it kind of going the other way? It was like, what could this tune turn into?
Absolutely. I think I let the tune dictate where it went. For example, the Day Dawn, again, is a Shetland tune that you played 2 nights ago.
Friday night.
And what I ended up doing with that tune is the 4 members, or well, 3 of the members are playing in very close canon. So it's almost has this shadowing kind of effect. And I thought that was something that the tune has this sort of otherworldly character to it. And I thought that setting, that treatment sort of reflected that and accentuated that.
Well, that's a terrific illustration. I can hardly wait to hear that setting because I haven't heard this work yet. But that's, I think, really fascinating how one can find a very simply constructed old tune that at first glance is just a very modest design, but try to dig into the tune and find out what it really is expressing, and then elevate that expression in some fashion through some of the tools that we have as composers, right? And so a canon, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's really interesting, But what are some of the other tools that you might be able to use to elevate any given expression, whether it's a very ferocious expression or whether it's a very kind of like whimsical or whatever it might be? What are some of the techniques that you might employ?
Well, Domenic and I were just talking about the Vega Quartet played Ravel recently, and he was mentioning that he sees some similarities with this piece and Ravel. And I think for the entire piece, I was really drawing on those hundreds of years of string quartet repertoire to steal from, essentially. The composers are great stealers, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I tried to pick the things I loved and steal from all of them. So I forgot your question.
Well, some of the tools. The tools that you might have, for example, polyphony or extended harmony or different things like that.
Sure. Well, one of the things we were talking about is one thing I wanted to avoid was sort of pushing these simple diatonic or pentatonic melodies into a really lush romantic sound. And I think a lot of composers have done that, and it sounds great, but I'm not sure what it has.
There you go. Yeah, sure. Bruch has a great piece for violin and orchestra, the Scottish Fantasy.
Yeah.
Again, stitching together those.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I was trying to preserve the character of each tune, but push it into some new areas, drawing on the classical repertoire and 20th century music repertoire.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the challenges that I've faced with doing this kind of hybrid experiment is how much reference do you want to make, as opposed to, like, are you just going to throw it out altogether and just make it into a brand new fabric altogether? So, like, with the rhythmic vitality that is the Celtic way, it's not necessarily all that easy to achieve that with a string group, because it's a string group is set up for other purposes by and large, and so then do we try and replicate that earthy sound of that driving rhythm, or do we throw it out altogether and just it's a new voice, or do we kind of like occasionally touch on just a little reminder, oh, that's where it came from, but now we're back into the art direction?
Well, with these pieces, I wanted to present some element of the traditional tune that I'm using, not played with at all. So a good example maybe would be the red-haired boy, which is third, I think, in the piece. And so for that one, it's a very straightforward presentation of the melody. Just sort of the essential notes, not a lot of ornamentation and everything. But what I did was have them play. So Domenic will play 2 notes, and then it will sort of cycle through the quartet where each player plays 2 notes, and then 3 notes, and then they're also playing pizzicato, so they're plucking the strings, and that's actually another. It's the red-haired boy being played in a different key. So it sounds sort of more abstract than it. Well, no, I'm explaining it. It sounds more abstract as I explain it, but once you hear it, you just hear the tune. But how it's being articulated is by this sort of cycling through the quartet. Mm-hmm. So it's a way of preserving the tune, but still bringing some new kind of presentation setting.
Yeah. Well, I had another question. I don't want to get too far with this line of discussion before we do some demonstration. So should I go ahead and ask the one more question? Is that about right for time? Okay. Yeah. Well, it would be, to what extent do you imagine yourself now turning your compositional approach back around to the folk element? So in other words, like you've written it for a classical work, but as folk musicians, we're always influenced by some of the virtuosity and the creative arranging ideas and that kind of thing that is happening in the broader music scene, and so many of those ideas find their way into our own playing and our own arrangements. So, like, at what point do you imagine that you might be wanting to kind of encourage more collaboration directly with the folk musicians and sort of, so get everybody under the same tent?
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful. I mean, I'd love to do that. I mean, I think there's a piece for fiddler and string quartet in this discussion. Right
yeah,
here.
yeah, there we go.
But yeah, I think that would be really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, maybe we could do just a little bit of kind of discussion about the tunes themselves, just a couple of the tunes. We don't have a lot of time. And the two that sort of came to mind happen both to be Irish and happen both to be in E minor, but we know them, so why not? So one is a jig, it's actually a slip jig, and one is a reel. And so, I don't know, it's like, Domenic, would you like to play just a little bit of, let's say, Kid on the Mountain, maybe just the first 8 bars, and then Henry could play, and then I could play. We could kind of discuss different ways of approaching Get on the Mountain. This is a 5-part slip jig, but since we're short of time, we're not going to try to cover all 5 parts. We'll just kind of get some stylistic ideas.
Domenic, you'll have to start at the 9/8.
Okay, so this is what was basically on the score.
Great. Okay, so then, so we're
Okay,
to more or less in E minor.
Is more or less the way that a traditional player in Ireland would approach it. So. That's very ornamental, but that's just the way that the music is always played there. And most of that comes from pipes. The inspiration of the...
Well, it's the filigree that I think that people who aren't used to listening to Celtic music notice straight away before even many of the other really important components that 5 minutes, okay. You know, there is a lot of subtlety with the rhythm that maybe isn't noticed right off. What is noticed right off is the rolls, of course. And it's, oh, what's going on there? And so maybe I wonder if you'd like to try, you know. This is actually an Irish tune, so it's not necessarily going to be played. You know, people in Scotland would know it, but you wouldn't really give it the Scottish snap or, you know, something. But so whenever there's a dotted quarter note in a jig, you would be first measuring it out in even eighth note. So it'd be, it's like left hand pizzicato, right? And so then you would be like whether you could you could measure it as in, or you could wait a little longer on the first note and then hurry up to arrive on the third note. So it'd be. Right. And then that one's attention would be very clearly focused on the landing of the roll so that the third eighth note is pushed a little heavier. Right. So then that kind of segues into one of the more subtle ideas, and that's pushing the third eighth note to give that lilt. So you'd have. So you give a little nudge on every 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, yes, especially after 4, you really want to push those on. At the end of the phrase. That's a really important one. So much so that you would then want to really emphasize the landing by after the eighth note. You give a little appoggiatura from under. Yeah. Yeah, that's the idea. Right. And then and just really briefly, thing that you'd want to keep in mind is the slurring of the bowing pattern would be very much always starting on the third eighth note, so that you would have very few notes actually starting on the beat. You would hardly ever like. You always.
Maybe in Scotland, but in Ireland, no.
Yeah, but maybe you could just show a little.
Well, I mean, we'd always do.
Yeah, well, can you go on just a wee bit from there, actually? So it's right here. Yeah, I was actually kind of more thinking about, right, going into the B there to kind of Yeah, I agree with you at the beginning of the phrase that, and I think we'd do that too, although we wouldn't really do as many of those roles.
Let's Domenic play 2001 things that we just heard.
I mean, it would take a while.
Yeah. Put it back.
It's in the place.
Maybe you guys can play with it.
Yeah, that might be kind of actually fun.
1 minute.
1 minute.
Okay.
So all 5 parts of that, I don't know how many has it written out. 1, 2, 3.
I guess one final thing I'd want to say is as you can see, there's so much that goes into every little note, so much intricacy that goes into every little note that the trad players play. And I didn't want to presume to be able to do that. So I tried to, in this piece, tried to avoid that and then take my influence on the sort of larger scale, so that how the tune is set and where it's placed within the setting.
May I say something? You know, as a classical musician, we do a lot of contemporary works. And most of them, you know, we just do it for the sake of doing it, to support the contemporary composers. But this one we really like. And I think the reason it is successful is because it's really, it balances the respect to both genres so equally. It's not about making or force us classical musicians to imitate whatever the fiddlers can do, or, you know, like exactly imitate. It's inspired by it. But he kept an open mind what kind of variation can be done in a classical genre. With these 4 instruments, what can be done the best? I think that balance kept successful. It's really about preserve. It's about what we have here is just a starting point, and he went beyond, and that's why it's successful.
Well, I'd just like to thank Jamie, Henry, and Domenic for sticking your neck out there. And I tell you, there are at least two or three Irish pubs that I can get you gigs on. And without any further ado, let me introduce the incredible Vega Quartet, who just by their very work embodies excellence in an academic setting in ways that no other language can, and that's the language of music. So, Jessica Shuewu, Shuangwu, my writing here, I can't read it myself. Yin So Kong.
Yinzi.
Pardon?
Yinzi.
Yinzi Kong.
Yes.
Okay. And Guang Wang.
Yes.
All brilliant, even though I can't pronounce their names properly. So, the Vega Quartet in David Garner's string quartet. I ain't broke, but I'm badly bent.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.